Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. It's Sunday the 19th of June. I'm Andrew Wilson and this is the Full Scottish. This afternoon I have the latest daily update from Ukraine on day 116 of the illegal Russian war of aggression. Then I will introduce this afternoon's guests, and then together we will take a look at some of the week's headlines from Scotland and around the world. Russia's war in Ukraine could take years, the NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg has said. We must prepare for the fact it could take years. We must not let up in supporting Ukraine, he said, even if the costs are high, not only for military support, also because of rising energy and food prices. Russia is sending a large number of reserve troops to Severodonetsk from other battle zones to try to gain full control of the besieged eastern city, the governor of Ukraine's Luhansk region said on Sunday. Today, tomorrow, or the day after tomorrow, they will throw in all the reserves they have because there are so many of them. They're at critical mass, Serhiy Haidai said on national television. Two top commanders of fighters who had defended the Azovstal steel plant in Mariupol have been transferred to Russia for investigation, Russia's state news agency TASS has reported. Citing an unnamed Russian law enforcement source, TASS said late on Saturday that Svatoslav Palamar, the deputy commander of the Azov battalion, and Serhiy Volnysky, the commander of the 36th Marine Brigade of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, were both moved to Russia. 5 civilians were killed on Saturday in Ukrainian strikes on the occupied eastern city of Donetsk, according to pro-Russian local authorities. Several Russian missiles hit a gasworks in the Izium district in eastern Ukraine, Kharkiv regional governor Ole Sinihubov said on Saturday. A large-scale fire broke out. Rescuers localized the fire, he wrote on the Telegram messaging app. Russian missiles destroyed a fuel storage depot in Novomoskovsk, a town in eastern Ukraine, on Saturday. According to the head of the regional administration, 3 people have been sent to hospital. The Pentagon is considering sending 4 additional rocket launchers to Ukraine, Politico has reported. According to US Defense Department officials, speaking to the outlet on grounds of anonymity, the US may likely send 4 more high-mobility artillery rocket systems, making their total number about 8. The decision would be based on Ukrainian immediate needs, the official told Politico. Russia and Ukraine have carried out a prisoner exchange, the Kyiv Independent has reported. 5 captured Ukrainian individuals were returned to Ukraine on the 18th of June in exchange for 5 captured Russian individuals, according to the Ukrainian Defense Ministry's Intelligence Directorate. And Yulia Paevska, also known as Taira, the Ukrainian captured paramedic who was freed from Russian captivity during the week, has released a video thanking Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky for her release. I always believed that everything would be exactly this, and everyone who is now on the other side, they know everything will work out, she said. And President Zelensky presented state awards to border guards in Odessa as he visited the troops in southern Ukraine on Saturday. I want to thank you from the people of Ukraine, from our state, for the great work you are doing, for your heroic service, the president said. It is important that you are alive. As long as you live, there is a strong Ukrainian wall that protects our country. Now, we are lucky enough to be joined by 2 fantastic guests this afternoon. Firstly, Paul McLennan is East Lothian's first SNP MSP, with the constituency having been held by Labour before that. Paul was the local councillor for Dunbar and East Linton, and was both the SNP group leader and the East Lothian council leader from 2007 to 2012, and entered our parliament at Holyrood in the general election in Scotland last year. Paul, good morning, good afternoon. Thanks for joining us on the Full Scottish today.
Good afternoon, Andrew. How are you?
We're all doing well, thanks. It's great to see you. We're also joined by Anthony Salamone. Anthony is a political scientist and analyst. He is founder and managing director of European Merchants, which is a Scottish political analysis firm based in Edinburgh. He's a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts, a member of Edinburgh's Europa Institute, and is president emeritus of the Edinburgh University European Union Society. Anthony, good afternoon. How are you?
Well, thank you, Andrew. How are you?
I'm very well and delighted to see both you and Paul on the Full Scottish today. Now, the first item we were going to look at is a little bit of British politics. On Friday, the Prime Minister had been due to be the star speaker at the first conference of the Northern Research Group of Tory MPs at Doncaster Racecourse. About 30 MPs were in attendance, along with hundreds of Tory supporters and local businesses, in what had been billed as a chance for Johnson to win back support after last week's confidence vote. Organisers had expected Johnson to attend, and there had also been speculation he would go to Wakefield before next week's by-election. In fact, Johnson was replaced by Michael Gove, appearing by video link, but the non-appearance of the Prime Minister has caused major disappointment amongst many at the conference. Northern Research Group source said Boris agreed to come and speak to the biggest caucus of Conservatives in the party, this group who represent his majority and came through for him in the leadership vote. That goodwill is gone. His actions have shown total contempt for colleagues, contempt for members, and contempt for the North. So it appears that Boris Johnson would rather go to a war zone with a photo opportunity than face the Northern Research Group of Tory MPs and visit a crucial by-election. So Anthony, firstly, is it being unfair to say that Johnson is back in the habit of hiding in fridges again, or is a photo op with President Zelensky actually better politics for Johnson than talking to his supporters in Doncaster?
Well, I suppose it depends on what his longer-term objectives are. We know that Boris Johnson very much wanted to be Prime Minister. He wanted to be Prime Minister, not necessarily having an agenda associated with that. And if he wants to continue to be Prime Minister for the years ahead, then of course he needs sufficient support of his backbenchers, and that includes this Northern Research Group. So it doesn't make a lot of sense if he's interested in a long-term future as Prime Minister, if he doesn't engage sufficiently with backbenchers and try to win them over. Because of course his main way of trying to do that to get him into the position was in his words, delivering Brexit, getting Brexit done. We are well past that at this point. He needs something different if he wants to survive a future confidence vote, and that means engaging with backbenchers, even if it's difficult for him.
And that's an interesting point, Anthony. We know that it's said that in terms of his leadership and his style of leadership, that Johnson is very much about leading day to day. It's whatever is driving the news agenda in the current 24-hour period that then determines government policy and determines his behaviour. So do you think, and you were talking about his long-term plans, do you think the Prime Minister has any long-term plans?
I'm not sure. It's hard to tell. I mean, he gives the external impression of being somewhat superficial and very sort of daily oriented, which, by the way, must be extremely tiring and inefficient for government if the core leadership of the UK government is ostensibly sort of changing its views depending on what happens every single day, rather than having a more defined long-term plan. But that's not to say that he doesn't have his own ambitions, or perhaps even a strategy, which is sort of hidden amidst the buffoonery that he very willingly projects and wants to be known for. But it's hard to know what that plan is beyond and perhaps staying in power for a particular length of time. It's hard to know that, I think. But what is clear is that it's not a good way to run a government.
Absolutely. Thanks, Anthony. And Paul, thinking of these Tory supporters for a moment, we know that in the recent vote of confidence that if you discount the approximately 160 Tory MPs who hold government roles, and so you would expect that they would back Johnson, if you discount them, almost 75% of Conservative MPs voted against their Prime Minister. Now, this is a pretty resounding rejection from his own backbenches. So were you surprised that rather than talk to folks who've just voted against him, Johnson instead chose a day trip to Kyiv?
No, I'm not surprised. I think Boris Johnson does, tend to run his premiership day to day, and the optics, I think, of him being seen with President Zelensky in Ukraine, I think would be a lot stronger for him than it would be, and I think he would be in for a hard time meeting the Northern Research Group in terms of that, because as you said, 75% of MPs, backbench MSPs, were against him, and I think what we've seen in the past is with Conservative MPs, if they think they're going to lose out electorally, they'll move very quickly to move a Prime Minister on. We've seen that on a few occasions. So I think he realised that. I think the optics have been seen in Ukraine were much stronger than possibly being criticised by the Northern Research Group. And where he goes from there, I don't know. I don't know what he'll need to do to turn that group of MPs round. If they think they're going to lose it electorally, they will look for opportunities to change the current rules and try and get them out quicker before any other election.
Thanks, Paul. You mentioned MSPs briefly there, and just as we're lucky enough to have you on the programme today, in terms of the behaviour of Scottish or Conservative MSPs in Scotland, what kind of behaviours are you observing from that small group in our Parliament? And in particular, how do you feel that they're responding or they're dealing with Johnson's behaviour?
They're quite open about their disdain for him. I think Douglas Ross obviously has changed his mind on a few occasions, but certainly in private conversations and in conversations within the Parliament themselves, they're very open about their disdain for him. I haven't seen any current MSP that will come out and actually Tory MSP that would come out and support him. They're quite open about their disdain for him, and I said that's in the chamber, that's in private discussions they have with him. So, and I know the press continue to ask him about that. So, but they're quite open about it. But their MP group, I think, is slightly different. But certainly within the MSP group, I don't think there's a lot of time for Boris Johnson at all.
That's useful insight. Thank you, Paul. Now, Mr. Johnson's visit follows that of Emmanuel Macron, Olaf Scholz and Mario Draghi of Italy. They offered their support for Ukraine to become a candidate for European Union membership, an issue that's going to be considered by all 27 leaders of the EU next week. Referring to a decision by the European Commission on Friday to recommend approval of that step, Vladimir Zelensky described it as a historic moment for his country. Britain, of course, has left the European Union, so its assistance to Mr. Zelensky is rather more focused on selling or supplying weapons. So, Anthony, do you think, was this a conscious decision by Johnson to try to edge onto the world stage a little bit because he could see that the EU leaders were doing more and getting more attention?
Well, it's certainly possible, yes. I think throughout the war, the UK government has been keen to demonstrate that the UK still has something to contribute to European international security. Of course, the UK does, but to do so in a way which is sort of alongside or contrasted with the EU. That's not helpful. Of course, the focus should be on aiding Ukraine and not about the politics. But of course, there's politics within the EU as well on this decision to recommendation from the Commission and endorsement by big member states that Ukraine should become a candidate country. Of course, there's internal EU politics on that too. So yes, I imagine that there may not have been a coincidence that Johnson wanted to be in Ukraine around the same time as the leaders of the EU, and it's important to recognize the consequences of Brexit. I mean, if Brexit had never happened, it would be very logical to have expected the UK Prime Minister to have got along on that visit with the Chancellor of Germany and President of France and Prime Minister of Italy and so on, and for the UK to have been part of that group. But Johnson wanted Brexit to happen, and the UK has no role on an issue like Ukraine joining the EU, and that's what Brexit means.
Well, that's a good question, Anthony. Do you think that the breakdown in diplomatic relations between Westminster and Brussels, or Westminster and the leaders of the 27 EU states, do you think is that getting in the way of collaboration and cooperation in dealing with the situation in Ukraine and dealing with Russia?
I think generally speaking, the EU and the UK have been able to work relatively well on the issue of the war and dealing with Russia, despite differences, including the legal issues or the UK government's actions around the Northern Ireland Protocol. I think, nevertheless, the two sides have been able to work together in a way which may have otherwise been surprising, given the difficulties in the bilateral relationship. Nevertheless, I think it's important to be clear here. The difficulties are coming from be caused by the UK, the way in which the UK is trying to conduct its relationship with the EU in an adversarial way, in a confrontational way. From a position of strategic disadvantage, it doesn't really make much sense, of course. The EU is bigger politically, bigger economically, and we see that in the way in which the United States has worked very closely with the EU in addressing the Ukraine war, also with the UK, but primarily the response is between the United States and the EU, and the UK is not part of that. So yes, no, the UK needs a good relationship with the EU, and that means a fundamentally different approach from the UK government, which would be that relationship, and not always sort of being in an adversarial position vis-a-vis the EU institutions or member states.
Thanks, Anthony. Now we'll think about other ways in which Boris Johnson's government is taking a different approach for a moment, because on Tuesday, Boris Johnson's plan to send an inaugural flight of asylum seekers to Rwanda was abandoned after an 11th hour ruling by the European Court of Human Rights. Up to 7 people who had come to the UK seeking refuge had been expected to be removed to the East African country, but a ruling by the ECHR on one of the 7 cases allowed lawyers for the other 6 to make successful last-minute applications. That decision was seen as a significant and embarrassing blow for Boris Johnson and Priti Patel, who had promised to start sending asylum seekers 4,000 miles to the East African country in May. Now, Yvette Cooper tweeted, "There is no point in government blaming anyone else but themselves. Ministers are pursuing a policy they know isn't workable and that won't tackle criminal gangs." But they still paid Rwanda £120 million and hired a jet that hasn't taken off because they just want a row and someone else to blame. Ministers ignored all warnings about deep problems in this policy, from treatment of torture victims to the risk of making people trafficking worse. It shows shamefully that they care more about picking fights than serious policies. And they've lost all British decency and common sense, she finished. So, Paul, thinking of the politics here for a moment, are the events of Tuesday and the arrangement of a flight that never flew, are these events more or less exactly what a hard right-wing government would want? The chance to blame lawyers and foreigners for denying them the chance to be even more despicable than usual towards brown-coloured people who are doing nothing more than seeking asylum or refuge?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's indicative of where the UK government's going at the moment. I know we'll be touching on the ECHR later on, and this is just in the latest. And I think, again, this all comes back to very much government by optics. The optics for people who come out and say the government should be doing more around about legal asylum. This is about the optics for them. The Tories maybe appealing to some of what they see as their core voters. They were warned when it came out that this policy wouldn't work, and I think these warnings are being borne out just now. But you're seeing not just Priti Patel and Boris Johnson coming out and saying these things. I think there's obviously a diktat from UK Central Office about all their MPs saying the exact same thing. But it's the latest, and I think in a series of policy instructions and policy directives in terms of seen to be tough on asylum seekers. And I listened to an interview last week, and they were talking about people actually landing on Dover and asking them if they had heard about the flights to Rwanda. It wasn't putting people off coming to the UK at all. They didn't think it was workable. I don't think it'll stop what they're trying to do if it's illegal trafficking. I don't think that'll stop that either. It's about the optics. It always has been for Boris Johnson and Priti Patel, and this is an unworkable policy, and it's a very expensive policy. I wish they would put more money into trying looking at the real issues about causing this, and rather than trying to spend or waste money on sending people to Rwanda.
Thanks, Paul. Now, Anthony, there was a personally, frankly, stomach-churning puff piece for Priti Patel in the Telegraph yesterday, but in the midst of trying to portray her as something approximating a human being, the Home Secretary is quoted as saying, "You've got to look at the motivation of the European Court of Human Rights. How and why did they make that decision? Was it politically motivated? I'm of the view that it is absolutely scandalous. The way in which this court has operated is absolutely scandalous." So is this simply more, well, it's the opposite of virtue signalling. Is this more viciousness signalling by a Tory Home Secretary, or is there more to it in the politics? Is this Patel competing for the optic of being and the prize of being the Tory politician who can do the worst thing to those who are least able to defend themselves?
Well, to me, I mean, it links very clearly to the question of whether or not the Conservative Party and leading the UK government want to withdraw from all or part of the European Convention on Human Rights, either by doing so directly or by repealing the Human Rights Act, which of course has been a pledge or an idea since at least the premiership of David Cameron. I think that the comments from Priti Patel link very strongly to that prospect. And of course, it's not not acceptable, frankly, to call into question the impartiality of a judiciary simply because you don't agree with that judgment. The judges of the European Court of Human Rights are judges just like judges in the Supreme Court in London or the High Court in London or the Court of Session or what have you. They're judges. Their job is to apply the law as they're supposed to. That's what they have done in this case, as they do in all of their cases. And to call their integrity into question because it's politically expedient further undermines the role of the judiciary and the rule of law at a time in which those are challenged. And that is not an appropriate response from a government minister.
Absolutely. Thanks, Anthony. And Paul, again, thinking of the politics here, it's a read across. Are we seeing, whilst it can be argued that Brexit and the EU became an issue that caused huge division in the Conservative Party for decades and has led the country to the current condition that it's in, are we now seeing a read across? Is it the same hardline Brexiteers who are now using this opportunity, both in terms of viciousness signalling round about the treatment of refugees, but also in terms of their right wing agenda now turning on the ECHR? I'm thinking in particular, we've seen a number of Tory grandees pointing out that the European Convention on Human Rights was written by conservative lawyers. And now the Tory party, or what appears to be the Tory party, are now seeking to be against it. Do you think this is part of an ongoing right-wing policy agenda, Paul?
Yeah, I think it is, and almost in a way they almost contradict themselves, because when people hear about the European Court of Human Rights, people automatically think it's part of it's going back to an EU directive. I mean, obviously the convention, the ECHR, is obviously between the states, the councils in Europe, but that's not, and it's not the EU. And you've almost heard the Conservative MPs almost trying to avoid that important issue. That no, this is not the EU trying to impose its will against the will of the British people, as they keep on saying. So they're almost contradictory in what they say. And yeah, the general narrative, I think, coming from that is that it's almost nobody tells us what to do. We're taking back control, sort of thing. And it's absolutely, to be honest, I mean, it's absolutely disgusting in terms of in that regard. We were warned about the human rights issues in Rwanda as well, in that one particular country. But the general narrative they're trying to put across is almost, take back control was one of the key strap lines, if you like, at the time with the Brexiteers, and they're still trying to go down that line, still trying to conflate that this is about the EU trying to tell the UK what to do. That's not the case. And when that's pointed out to them, they go quiet on that issue.
Completely, Paul. Thank you. And Anthony, one last thing. In terms of this general policy approach from the Conservative government in Westminster, maybe it's just me. I'm a human being. I'm in favour of human rights laws and protecting human rights. Maybe it's just me being personal. What do you think is at the root, or what do you think is driving this policy agenda for Westminster in terms of apparently saying that human rights are a bad thing?
It's rather hard to tell, because I also happen to support human rights as a concept. And I think it links through to the sort of the right-wing agenda which the Conservative Party has adopted, which is to say that certain institutions of the state or of civil society, be they courts, be they lawyers collectively, be they NGOs and so on, have some sort of strange hyper-progressive agenda which doesn't fit with you, our dear voters, and we as the Conservative Party are going to change things or take them on or what have you. It's completely artificial. Of course, there are always differences between groups on policies, whether you divide society on the left-right basis or however you divide it. Of course, people will have different views, nuanced views on what government policy should be. But it's very artificial to say that core state institutions like courts, be they courts in the UK or be they courts like the ECHR, part of the Council of Europe, somehow have an agenda other than what they're meant to do. That's convenient for the Conservative Party, but it's not true and undermines democratic institutions.
Completely. Thank you, Anthony. We've been looking in one way at travel or people travelling to the UK, but we're going to move now and think about travel more outbound from the UK for a moment. Because at the beginning of this month, an airline chief blamed airport chaos on lazy Brits who live off benefits and sit on their arses. His words, not mine. And he blamed it on Brexit, according to reports. The comment allegedly came from the Jet2 boss, Steve Heapy, during talks as the industry tried to replace employees lost during the pandemic. British Airways and EasyJet called for more powers when it comes to hiring visa-free workers from Europe, with unemployed cabin crew in Spain a possible source of labour for them. A Jet2 spokesperson said during a meeting with government and industry, Mr. Heapy expressed his frustrations with the current employment market as Brexit has taken hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people out of the job market, and this is having an impact on many industries, including ours. And that comes as further reports claim that EasyJet is finding it difficult to employ key staff as workers want more than the £17,000 to £24,000 salary available. And Swissport has echoed that sentiment, revealing that baggage handlers want higher salaries due to high demand for the role. So, Anthony, first of all, should anyone be surprised that these problems at UK airports are being linked to Brexit by the leaders of the travel industry? And are those leaders correct in their analysis that it is Brexit that's at the root of the problem?
It's hardly surprising that Brexit would be referenced by industry leaders, be it in travel or in other parts of the economy, because of course Brexit is having and has had a sustained long-term impact on the health of the economy, on the shape and size of the labor market, and those effects will be with us for years to come. Now, in terms of pinpointing this particular crunch, is it due to Brexit? Is it due to the consequences of the pandemic? Is it because of the cost of living crisis at the moment, or what have you? Of course, it's very difficult to disaggregate and point to say, well, this one particular instance was caused by Brexit. But I think the difference is that the pandemic, as challenging as it's been for everyone, is temporary, except for the people who have the longer term consequences of it. The cost of living crisis, we also hope, an inflation issue, also hope is temporary, but Brexit is not. Unless the UK ever happened to rejoin the EU, Brexit is a permanent change, a permanent negative that has attached itself to the UK economy. And it's very reasonable to think that it is playing a role in this kind of disruption when it comes to aviation and other parts of the economy, including agriculture, for instance. And so it's no surprise that businesses want, via visa waivers or work permits, what have you, to access in a sense, the same workers or replacement workers from the EU that they would have done completely paperwork-free under freedom movement in the first place. Because being part of the EU, being part of the single market, being part of free movement was good for the UK, and now we're missing it.
Thanks, Anthony. And Paul, the London Mayor, Sadiq Khan, has said that Brexit was to blame for the chaos at Britain's airports, and he called on the government to relax immigration rules so that airport and airline workers from the EU could return to the UK and thereby avoid a summer of travel misery. But of course, the Transport Secretary, Grant Shapps, rejected the claims, saying that the door to cheap, in his words, cheap foreign workers wasn't the answer to relieving the pressure on the aviation sector. So I was interested to see the London Mayor passing comment and stepping in particular talking about immigration laws and the movement of workers. Do you think that Scottish politicians should also be commenting or trying to help out or bringing forward concrete proposals to change movement of workers and change immigration rules to try and address this problem?
Yeah, and I mean that's already been discussed in the Parliament. I know Scottish Government have been trying to raise this with the UK Government. There are various sectors in Scotland which are suffering, whether it's the agriculture industry, whether it's the hospitality industry, the tourism. I think that these are key issues that have been raised. Scottish Government have raised this with the UK Government and get absolutely nowhere. Again, this comes back to the whole point of independence, being able to set our own policies in that regard. And one of the key things I think for me during the week was that the ONS brought out the studies brought out the latest figures on employment and unemployment, and they kind of indicated that the number of people that have been lost, EU workers that have been lost in the last year or so, have been about 1 million people. Now the vacancy rate is 1.3 million. So you can see the connection in that regard. And we've had the ridiculous situation. We've had Tory MPs coming out and saying maybe if we rejoin the single market, that would be a way to solve it. And yet you've got party colleagues who are still trying to push the Brexit line. And I think Anthony's right. We've heard about visa waivers and so on being raised. When's it going to stop about raising visa waivers? The easiest thing would be, as I said, is for the UK to join back into the EU. That's not going to happen. The only way we're going to get that back in Scotland is for Scotland to rejoin the EU as an independent country. And the other key thing I think for me, Andrew, as well, was during the week we've seen David Davis, one of the main Brexiteers, being interviewed during the week, I think, on Robert Pesson's show, asked to can you name some advantages of Brexit? He couldn't. He said we need to wait another year. He couldn't give one example of the advantages of Brexit since it's happened, and that for me was telling. And his answer was, "Wait another year and we'll see." They know they made a mistake, but they won't back down politically.
That's a good point, Paul. I think we all wish that David Davis had stuck to selling sugar rather than negotiating a Brexit settlement. Anthony, Paul have been talking a little bit about the permanent negative impact on the permanent negative economic impact of Brexit on the UK. Now, historically, and it may just be public relations and spin, but the Conservatives were regarded as being the political party who were more motivated perhaps by economic stability and economic growth. Do you think, is there any process as Brexit, as the absolute absence of any benefits of Brexit continue to unfold, and at the same time the economic damage continues, do you think there's much prospect in the near to middle term of the conservative dogma and conservative policy changing, and a recognition that there is permanent damage, long-term damage to the UK economy?
I think the position will change under Boris Johnson, put it that way. I think it would need to take a new leader of the Conservative Party who would be willing or able to fundamentally shift the party in a different direction. Boris Johnson, is, I suppose, in reference to what you mentioned, an anomaly in the sense that he does not seem as motivated by, supporting big business or relentlessly focusing on economic growth or slashing the deficit because it's just good to have a low deficit, as previous Conservative prime ministers and chancellors did. He's not been focused on that. He is along with other conservative or centre-right or right parties in other parts of the world, has refashioned what a sort of right-leaning party is into one which is focused on culture wars and populism in the sense of Brexit, and just trying to rewrite history and ignore realities that are obvious. And in this case, trying to pretend that the UK's relationship with the EU isn't all that important, generally speaking, but particularly for the economy and trade, that to somehow suggest to the public that it makes more sense to have left the EU, to have a thin trade deal with the EU, but securing a trade agreement with Australia and New Zealand is somehow better for the economy. It's not better for the economy. Boris Johnson can lie and pretend that that's the case, but it's not. So it's a very strange dynamic where the Conservative Party, as led by Boris Johnson, clearly cares less about the economy, more about the object of his Brexit populism, and trying to convince us all that what he wants us to believe is true, and it's not. The UK it has been and will be damaged from having left the EU, and you just have to look at a map to realize that the UK is right next to the EU. So politically speaking, economically speaking, geopolitically speaking, the UK, it matters what the relationship between the EU and the UK is. The EU is a lot bigger. The EU will continue to influence the UK and UK policies regardless of whether the UK is part of the EU or not. And that relationship is one that matters a lot, and regardless of the fact that Boris Johnson doesn't seem to think so.
Thanks, Anthony. Now we'll move on a little bit, if we may, and we'll have a little bit of a look at the Tory cost of living crisis and the latest responses to the cost of living crisis, because thousands of trade unionists and others travelled from across the UK and marched through central London yesterday, calling for action on the cost of living crisis and the impact rising costs are having on working people. Under the slogan, "We demand better," demonstrators called for a fairer deal for low-paid workers whose wages have not kept up with inflation, which is now at a 40-year high of 9%, whilst at the same time company bosses are seen to be scooping million-pound salaries. The Public Services Union Unison, which represents NHS workers, led demonstrators to Parliament Square, and at least 30 unions were billed to join the march, representing education, transport, health, civil servants, hospitality, engineers, scientists, as well as members of the RMT union, which has, of course, confirmed 3 days of strike action to go ahead later across the UK rail network later this month. The union claims that it's going to be holding the largest strike in rail history, and say that they are calling on the entire labour movement and working class people in the country to rally behind them and for everyone to seek an improvement in their life. To those who are critical of the rail strikes that are planned, the RMT Assistant General Secretary Eddie Dempsey said, "We are your friends. If you haven't had a pay rise, we are the people who are going to help you get it. We're out here with posties, nurses, teachers, everyone who's had a kicking over the past few years. We are ready to coordinate action and help you get the same things." His point is really that public sector workers have had the greatest hit to their pay packets, with their wages on average rising by 1.5% over a period last year, compared to private sector wages, which were increasing by 8 or 9%. So, Paul, firstly, thinking about the cost of living crisis more generally, what are you seeing or hearing about the Tory cost of living crisis in your casework and in your work in our Scottish Parliament?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's safe to say, Andrew. I mean, a lot more of our casework now is coming through is dealing with the issue, and before you would probably see a lot of the casework coming through, and I suppose debt advice would be people getting into trouble with credit and so on, and how to deal with that. Now it's more around about people primarily through fuel poverty who actually have more expenditure than income. And it makes it a very difficult position. I'm also on the Social Security Committee at the Parliament, and at the moment we're undertaking an inquiry into that issue, and that's coming across loud and clear from debt advice agencies that's the case. We will be speaking as well to the credit company, the power companies themselves, and how they deal with that. And I think there's a lot more effort needing to looking around about how we can look at the fuel poverty advice. There's people need to be trained up and need to be moved across, and there is a real issue now. As I said, this is about people having more expenditure than income, not about credit issues. It's just purely more expenditure than income, and that's coming through very loud and clear in both at the committee and in the casework. And I think we're literally just touching the tip of this at the moment. That some of the costs are coming through. We're in the summer. I think when the other additional costs go up in October again, we'll really start to see it hit this winter. So there's a lot more I think we need to be looking to do. Scotland has got its hand tied behind its back again when it looks about what it can do in terms of that, in terms of welfare policies and how we protect the most vulnerable in our society.
Thanks, Paul, and I'll come back to you a little bit about that in a moment. But there was one thing tying back to the previous item that we discussed. Anthony, I was wondering, first of all, do you think our voters and others, are they seeing a connection between Brexit and the cost of living crisis as it is manifesting itself in the UK? Are they making a connection between the restrictions on the movement of people, the restrictions on the movement of goods, the reduction in economic activity, and all of the other impacts that Brexit has brought? So are they seeing a connection, or is that passing them by, do you think?
I think some people will have noticed that the impact is the consequence of Brexit, but it's hard to tell sometimes. I think it comes to people's individual experiences. A lot of what happens with Brexit, well, a lot of the impact of Brexit is either things which are experienced individually or silently. If you know that you're running a small business and you can get a contract because the paperwork is too difficult with Brexit, or you weren't able to expand your business because you couldn't get the labor you wanted. I mean, not everyone is going to sort of write that up and send to the newspaper or post it on Instagram or what have you. So a lot of the impact can be privately felt. And then, a lot of the impact of Brexit is about things that don't happen. It's not about things that sort of happen differently. It's things that just never materialize. Job offers that are never made, careers that never get started, businesses that are never created, contracts that are never secured, things that aren't happening that would have happened before. So it's not necessarily just about the economy shrinking. It's about it not growing as much as it would have done before, for instance. So I'm sure that many people probably do recognize specific instances of things that didn't happen or aren't happening as they would have done before in their lives as a consequence of Brexit. But in other cases, it's really hard to tell. If you're just doing your shopping and the food prices have increased, is it because of Brexit? Is it because of the general inflationary crisis that we have at the moment? Is it because of the war between Russia and Ukraine? It's hard to tell, but Brexit is certainly a factor there.
Absolutely. Thanks, Anthony. Paul, you were talking there about the way in which people are responding just now, and your concerns about the way in which that response will change over time, especially, as you say, we move to October, when the energy price cap is expected to go up again significantly, and, as you also say, as we move into winter, where the costs of heating properties, especially in Scotland, are even higher than they are in other parts of the United Kingdom. So, Paul, and following on from what Anthony was saying, do you think voters are analysing the factors behind the current Tory cost of living crisis, or are people now increasingly just dealing with the challenges day to day, dealing with it on a hand-to-mouth basis?
I think there is more awareness of where the issues are coming from, and it goes back to the point that Anthony mentioned before, obviously, around about the impact of Brexit and so on. We talked about that. I mean, there are certain things that are driving it through. I mean, if you look at some of the UK economic indicators, I mean, the trade deficit now in the UK has gone up. We talked about a tight labour market, and of course, it's the old supply and demand. So you're seeing the costs going up in that regard. And I think you obviously seen at the moment what people haven't seen is the pound has dropped roughly around about 10% in 4 or 5 months, because the markets, the currency markets, see the UK as a weak currency. So I think people are more aware of the wider picture than that. We also have the highest inflation rate, the lowest growth rate, and we're heading towards a recession. We're heading towards stagflation, possibly. So I think voters are more aware of what the general narrative is that's out there, and are looking for the UK government to do more. We have no macroeconomic levers up in Scotland to deal with and about to deal with this, and I think people do see that. And certainly the evidence we've got coming through, the report I think that the Social Security Committee will be coming out with will be asking the UK government a lot of asks in terms of the welfare system that's there, and is it robust enough to protect the most vulnerable in our society. Scottish Government can do various things. We've talked about the child winter heating allowance, I think, is an opportunity, the child payment, preschool meals. These are things that we can do on a short-term basis. On a longer-term basis, we need to look at the role of Ofgem in terms of that, and what are they doing, and to try and look at are they doing enough. And obviously we've got the potential renewables in the long-term future to make sure that we don't come across this again, and we make sure we maximise the opportunities in the renewables to make sure we don't have ongoing fuel poverty.
Yes, of course, Paul. Thank you. And Anthony, coming back to the demonstrations yesterday, for example, do you think and the statements that we heard from various trade unionists and others who attended the marches in London, do you think that we're now going to see an increase in organised industrial action? And do you think, is there a prospect that in the face of a cost of living crisis, the like of which none of us have ever experienced, do you think it might go so far as an organised general strike?
I think it's hard to tell at this stage. As Paul mentioned, this crisis is having very real impacts on large numbers of people. I think that the idea of wage rises, makes sense. I'm very sympathetic to that. On the other hand, some economists would caution about creating an inflationary spiral as well. And so I'm sure that, those who are in a position of deciding those things will certainly take that into account and probably mention it. It's hard to tell where things will go. I suppose some differences between, for instance, the sort of stagflation period of the 1970s is obviously we now have much easier means of organizing and galvanizing people through social media, which makes it a lot easier to organize a very large civil society movement or demonstration than it would have been 50, 60 years ago. So yes, I suppose it is possible. The question is, how long will this cost of living crisis last? And as Paul referenced, it could be with us for some time. Banks are obviously raising interest rates now, and it been quite a lot compared to how they were historically so low for such a long period of time. That is tended to cool the economy. It's unclear how, whether that when or how, whether that will take effect, and more importantly what the secondary consequences will be. So this yet again another period of uncertainty, and we just have to see what happens in the months ahead.
That's a good point, Anthony. It certainly crossed my mind that with Kate Bush at number one, a heat wave in England at the moment, soaring inflation and major strikes, if you're a fan of 1976, it's a great time to be alive. But we'll stop thinking about 50 or 60 years ago and we'll start thinking about the future now, because our First Minister has said that what this past week has shown is that the opponents of independence are running scared when it comes to the debate on Scotland's future. They are running scared of the facts on independence, and they are running scared of the facts on the UK's abysmal performance compared to other nations. The paper the Scottish Government published this week shows that the UK has been left in the slow lane when it comes to economic and social league tables by a whole raft of smaller, independent European nations. She also said the Tories and Labour have completely failed to engage with that point because they know it is true, and because they can see how threadbare the case for continued Westminster rule over Scotland has become. She finished by saying they simply have no answer, so instead of engaging in that debate, they prefer to engage in the politics of deflection, talking about issues of process when on the issues of substance, the sands are shifting beneath their feet. So, Paul, firstly, is the First Minister correct? Unionists have no answer to or no explanation of their dismal social and economic performance.
Andrew, I mean, I think it's been very noticeable in the Parliament this week around about how both, you would expect it from the Conservative Party around about saying that there shouldn't be another referendum. What's really been noticeable this week is Labour doubling down on there shouldn't be a referendum. And I think that there are two principles for me. One is establishing the right and the mandate to hold a referendum. There's a pro-independence majority of 72 MSPs to 57 against independence. So there's a very clear, it's the biggest ever pro-Indy majority in the Scottish Parliament. There's a clear mandate on the back of that to hold a referendum. I can understand the Conservative position in the regard. I don't understand why Labour are doubling down on that position that there shouldn't be a referendum. There's a very clear pro-independence majority. And I think one of the key things I think for me is that like Anas Sarwar and his colleagues are coming out, and it's almost like they're trying to slight the SNP because of their position. What they're doing is not slighting the SNP. It's slighting the hundreds of thousands of voters that voted on a pro-independence majority mandate manifesto back in May last year. And I think it'll come back and bite Anas Sarwar in that regard. In regards to the other issue, in terms of where the comparison about UK economy to the Scottish economy, it's very clear. Highest inflation, lowest growth rates, a trade, a debt now of £2.45 trillion, a growing trade deficit, a weak pound has lost 10% of its value in the last 4 or 5 months. Brexit impact, the ongoing Brexit impact. It's very clear that the comparator paper that came out during the week shows there are opportunities for Scotland to go a different route, and I strongly believe that will happen, and people will choose that route.
Thanks, Paul. And Anthony, I'll come to you in the next facet of this past week's discussion round about independence for Scotland, because the full-time Twitter troll and part-time politician Murdo Fraser, who's the Tory MSP for Mid-Scotland and Fife, was appearing on GB News when he was asked whether the rest of the UK shouldn't vote to leave Scotland. Fraser's response summed up beautifully just some of the significant resources which an independent Scotland will instantly have. Murdo said, if Scotland leaves the UK, we lose roughly a third of the landmass of Great Britain, probably about half of our territorial waters. And it's worth noting that Fraser says we. He appears to be talking from the position of a Tory in London, not someone in Scotland. He then went on, we lose the magnificent resource that is Scottish fishing waters. We lose the opportunities from North Sea oil and gas. We lose the potential for renewable energy from Scotland's coasts and the North Sea. We lose access to barrier-free trade for Scotch whisky and Scotch salmon, all these fantastic exports. And then he rounds up by saying that we would lose the opportunity to study at some of the world's greatest universities. So I can't tell how Scotland leaving the UK would deprive Scots of the chance to go to Scottish universities. That passed me by completely. But anyway, the question, Auntie, is Murdo's performance this week on GB News, is it evidence, perhaps, or the latest evidence, that ardent unionists like Murdo are already starting to fall apart?
I'm not sure what his strategy was, but I imagine part of it could be to try to convince people in London and more generally in England of the importance, in his view, of trying to make arguments for the UK Union, which is to say that many people in the English political parties, in the UK Conservative Party, UK Labour Party, UK Liberal Democrats, are not concerned by the sort of seriousness of the independence debate or the genuine prospect of Scotland becoming independent, and perhaps Murdo would like them to be. That certainly makes sense. As for the various arguments, I'm sure we could dissect some of them. I don't see how people wouldn't be able to attend Scottish universities, whether they lived in Scotland or whether they lived in England, if Scotland were an independent country. And as for some of the other things he mentioned, well, it's kind of obvious that if Scotland became independent, Scottish waters would be Scottish waters, and the rest of the UK waters would be the rest of the UK waters. Those are just statements of fact rather than arguments for or against a particular position. And yes, obviously, as we approach a prospective referendum, both sides of the argument will need to have arguments. And I wonder what the pro-UK argument would be. In the past, it was vote to stay in the UK, and we can lead the UK, and you can have more powers for this and so on. It's kind of hard to imagine Boris Johnson, if in a referendum scenario saying, vote to stay part of the UK, and I will give you these new powers, given that's not been his approach via Brexit, for instance. So yeah, I imagine, Murdo Fraser, along with everyone else on the pro-UK side, are looking for arguments, and I think they'll have a much harder time finding a coherent one compared to last time.
Thanks, Anthony. And Paul, does this particular, well, some might say peculiar perspective from Murdo, do you think does it tell us something? He seems to say that as a Scot, he will lose some of Scotland's assets when Scotland becomes independent. So does this suggest that for Murdo and for others, it's all about the economic value and the assets that Scotland has, and that he sees independence through a transactional prism? It's all about what Westminster can have or will lose, rather than about perhaps more widespread or more significant issues such as democracy.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, at the moment, the debate in the Parliament has been going on and about the right to hold the referendum and the democratic right to do so. I think that'll probably, for the next 2 weeks, I'd imagine will be the case. And First Minister's raised it, and with both parties. Angus Robertson's raised it with both I'm saying both parties, Tories, Labour and the Lib Dems, are in about the democratic right. And I think that's a very strong point for pro-Indy parties to raise. I think we need to then move on to the debate around about, let's look at the prospective cases. And Anthony's right. I don't think the UK will have a strong view. We were told vote no to stay in the EU. That's not worked out. We were told there would be a cost of living crisis if Scotland left the UK. Well, we're seeing where we are just now in terms of that. And the comparator paper that came out during the week, I think, indicates where Scotland is at the moment. And one key paper that kind of came out in the last few weeks was about the foreign direct investment. And Scottish foreign direct investment went up 14%, as against 1.8% in the UK and 5% in the EU. So it's the highest rate. So these are people, from out with Scotland who have faith in the Scottish economy by investing into Scotland because they see the strength of the Scottish economy. And this was Ernst & Young that put this together. So, there are various statements out there saying that about the attractiveness of Scotland to invest. And I have no doubt when we become independent, that attractiveness will go up, and people will see the vast opportunities that Murdo himself has highlighted. The renewable sector we talked about, he talked about obviously salmon and whisky, talked about Scottish water, fishing waters and so on, and so I think they're running scared. I think that indicates for me that Murdo and the Conservatives are running scared about actually having that debate, because they cannot stand up and defend the current state of the UK economy, and that's not just where it is just now. That's been going downhill for the last number of years, and it's completely different to where we were in 2014. They have no arguments at all to come back, and I look forward to engaging in the Parliament and out with their people on doorsteps, saying about the potential Scotland has. And it's not just potential; it's what we have at the moment. But we need the full powers of independence to make sure that we grow the sectors that are incredibly important.
Thanks, Paul. Absolutely. And Anthony, at the end of her statement, the First Minister said, with the publication of this week's paper, the campaign for an independence referendum has now begun in earnest, and she is determined to deliver the legal constitutional referendum that the people of Scotland have voted for. Now, we've been talking about Brexit a little bit this afternoon, and it was on my mind over the weekend, and I was just reflecting on the nature of referendums or referendi. We know that the Brexit referendum was an advisory referendum, and that was one of the reasons it was impossible to challenge it successfully through the courts. So do you think that in terms of moving to the legal constitutional referendum that the First Minister says that she wishes, says that she is determined to deliver, do you think that there are lessons to be learned by the Scottish Government and by the independence movement in Scotland in terms of the way in which referenda are organised and carried out have been carried out in the UK recently?
Well, this is a complicated issue and we don't have a lot of time, but I think the short answer is no. The most important thing for a referendum generally is the political buy-in or societal agreement that's going to happen. It was less important that, officially the EU referendum in 2016 was an advisory referendum because of the doctrine of parliamentary sovereignty in England, which means that the UK Parliament is supreme and did not have to act on that basis. What was more important is that everyone knew that it was a serious referendum and that the UK government and the UK Parliament, first of all, had legislated for it, and secondly, we're going to implement it one way or the other. That's what matters. Regardless of whether or not a future independence referendum has a Section 30 order attached to it, or is sort of endorsed by UK Parliament legislation, or is just endorsed by a handshake, the legal aspects are far less important than the knowledge that everyone is going to participate in the referendum, that the Scottish government has signed up to it, that the UK government has signed up to it. The politics and the buy-in are what matter most, not whatever particular legal mechanism. It's hard to know what a legal referendum is anyway. Hard to say that democracy is illegal. Far more important question is it binding? Is it effective? Is an independence referendum going to result in anything? That's what matters, not whatever particular legal arrangement is arrived at.
That's an excellent analysis, Anthony. I'm extremely grateful to you for that. And Paul, finally, the First Minister began the next stage of the independence campaign last week. She says, in terms of next steps, and in terms of the immediate next steps, Paul, what do you think we will? What do you want? What would you like to see next, or what do you think is going to happen next?
Just to touch on the point that Anthony raised, I think that's a key point. There needs to be political buy-in, and the vote needs to be accepted. I think the First Minister indicated there'd be a series of papers looking at such as the borders, the currency, EU, and the mechanism towards how we would secure a referendum. And I think these will come forward, pretty quickly in the next number of weeks. I think that gives the pro-independence movement, I think, an opportunity to go out and campaign this summer on a very attractive prospectus that we have for independence. But I think there will be a series of papers in the next few weeks that does give us an opportunity to go out and start campaigning. We need to use the summer to go out and do that and make sure we maximise the efforts of the movement that I think that are desperate to get going again.
Thanks, Paul. Certainly looking forward to more information and more campaigning. It's and hopefully a relatively dry summer, at least from the perspective of activists and people who will be knocking on doors and holding stalls and holding events and campaigning. So thank you, Paul. And because that was our final item this afternoon. In making these programmes, Broadcasting Scotland relies on the support of viewers and others who value our distinctive approach to news and current affairs. Please help us to continue to make these programmes. If you would like to support us, then please subscribe or donate to Broadcasting Scotland. You will find the link to do that on the screen now. You will find our appeals for assistance on Facebook and Twitter because the urgent need for financial support has not gone away. There are, of course, other ways you can contribute to our work. If you'd like to volunteer to work with Broadcasting Scotland, then please visit our website at www.broadcastingscotland.scot or find us on Twitter at BroadcastScot, or search for us on Facebook, search for Broadcasting Scotland. Meantime, I'll be here again tomorrow. We will be here again tomorrow evening at 7 with the next edition of Scotland at 7. So please tune in and join us then. I hope that you enjoyed a tasty full Scottish today. I'd like to say thank you to everyone who has been watching, and a very special thanks to our fantastic guests today, Paul McLennan, MSP, and Anthony Salamone. Gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you.
I hope that everyone has a very peaceful Sunday and that you can join us here again on Broadcasting Scotland very soon. Bye-bye.